Welcome to today's Inquire question and answer session on the rights of children with additional support needs aged 12 to 15. I'm Kat Thompson. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager at Inquire, which I hope if you're all attending this event, you know that we're the Scottish Advice Service for Additional Support for Learning. We're really pleased today that Lucy Johnson and SJ Cruz, who are part of the My Rights, My Say team, have joined us today. The plan for this session is to start by asking Lucy and SJ just to introduce themselves and explain a little bit more about the My Rights, My Say service, and then briefly provide a summary of the rights of children with additional support needs who are aged 12 to 15. Lucy and SJ will then have a bit of time to take your questions. But just before we kick off, I'll just cover a few bits of housekeeping. I'd just like to say thank you to Sharon Elder, who's joining us today to do interpretation for us. This session is being recorded, so if you have to leave partway through, you can always catch the rest of it later on. We've got about 30 or 40 minutes, so if we don't get to your questions, please do look at the information that we're posting as we go through the conversation today. Because we're doing this session around children's rights aged 12 to 15, if there are particularly complex issues or we're getting questions outside of that topic, we will possibly ask you to contact the Inquire helpline or My Rights, My Say directly for more help or information. We would ask, if possible, not to share your children's names or schools or teachers' names in any questions, just so that we can protect everybody's privacy. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we will get them to Sarah Jane and Lucy. I'm just going to say, if I'm looking off to the left or looking down, it's because I'm looking at another screen to get the questions, so bear with me with that. And just at the end, it's always helpful to have people's feedback. So what I will do is ask a couple of questions at the end about how you find this session, and if you can give us some feedback, that's really, really helpful. So I'll hand over now to Sarah Jane or SJ to introduce herself. Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Hi everyone, I'm SJ and I am the My Rights, My Say coordinator for the advocacy part of our service. I've worked in My Rights, My Say for 2.5 years now, and My Rights, My Say was set up to enable young people 12 to 15 to exercise their rights. I'll talk about a couple of different parts of the service and then I'll hand over to Lucy. Could we have the slideshow up just so that we've got the presentation, please? Very much, and if we can move to the next slide, please. Perfect. So there are 4 parts to the service. I'll just talk about 2 and then I'll hand over to Lucy. So there are partners in advocacy who I work for, and we provide independent advocacy to young people looking to exercise their own rights with regards to the additional support for learning legislation and the My Rights, My Say. And we also have Cairn Legal, who provide legal representation to support children making a reference to the Additional Support Needs Tribunal or who are looking to make an application for independent adjudication. So I'll hand over to Lucy and she can explain the other parts.
Thanks, SJ. As Kat mentioned before, we're part of Inquire, so Inquire is part of My Rights, My Say as well. So we are the Scottish Advice Service for Additional Support for Learning. We raise awareness of children's rights to additional support for school and help families and schools work together to ensure children can get the support they need. And we provide advice to children and young people. And we do that in a number of ways, either direct work with children and young people. We have our Reach website, which has loads of information about understanding children's rights to be supported and involved in decisions about their learning. We have a lot of children and young people writing for us to share their experiences of support that has helped them or things that maybe could be done a lot better. And we are also a platform for the Inclusion Ambassadors to share their work. So the Inclusion Ambassadors are a group of children and young people from across Scotland who come together to share their experiences of support and to pass that on to decision makers or their wider school community. So in terms of My Rights, My Say, Inquire and Reach, our remit is to raise awareness of the rights of children and young people with additional support needs that are aged between 12 to 15. We also do that in partnership with our last partner there, Children in Scotland. So part of Children in Scotland's partnership is to work with key stakeholders, which includes schools and local authorities, to enhance professionals' practice in listening to children's views, but they also provide independent support to make sure that children's views are heard in formal processes such as tribunals. So collectively, that is My Rights, My Say, the partnerships that we work together. But I think the next thing that would probably make a bit of sense to go over is additional support for learning. If I could have the next slide, please. Fabulous. So in terms of additional support for learning, a child or young person has an additional support need for whatever reason they're unable, without support, to benefit from school education. Now, this could be short-term support needs, or it could be long-term. There's no time limits, and there's no age in particular. So a child could enter into education with an additional support need, or, for example, they could have a need in S1 for a term. There's also no diagnosis is required. Very much in Scotland, there's a focus on children's individual needs, and children and young people, they may have a support need because of a specific condition, so it may be autism or ADHD, but also they may require additional support because of other factors, things like bullying or English as an additional language. It's very individualised to the child in terms of what support they need. In terms of support that they're given, there's a legislation that is a framework to support those children regardless of their need, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in a moment. But in terms of what support looks like, as you can see on your screen there is a large selection, maybe not the best word, but a large number of reasons why children might have additional support needs. So anything, like I said, from bullying to moving schools frequently. And the support that they have could look very different depending on the child or the school. So it could be one-to-one support from a pupil support assistant, for example, or it could be an adaptation of the classroom or the learning materials that they need, or even an adaptation of the teaching that is going ahead there and then. Ultimately, it is the local authorities that have the responsibility for support and for education. Now, on a day-to-day basis, that's generally the school or the wider school community that offer that support. However, the responsibility does lie with the local authority, and that is supported by the legislation that I mentioned previously and the guidance that goes with that. Specifically, it's the Education or the ASL Scotland Act, which is the ASL Act. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So as you can see on that slide there is a bit of information, a bit of what the Education Additional Support for Learning Act is. So I won't go into too much detail about that today because it's quite in depth, but on the Inquire website, we do have our ASL fact sheet, or if you want any more information, you can find it on Inquire. But ultimately, there's a number of things that local authorities are expected to do. They have this, the responsibility to do things like identify support, review support, put arrangements in place to resolve disagreements. But like I said, there's more information on our Inquire website. So in terms of the support and in terms of My Rights, My Say, because that's what we're here to talk to you about today, it's rooted in the UNCRC, which is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So just as a brief overview of what that is, it's a statement of children's rights, which are made up of 54 articles, to be precise, that cover all aspects of life. And they're there to ensure that children and young people grow up healthy and safe, and their views are taken into consideration. So ultimately, My Rights, My Say is focused on education, but the general principles of the UNCRC cover every element of life. So whether it's education and leisure, or if it's being safe or having the right to play, so much of children's education or their learning is entwined with the rest of their lives. So although the UNCRC that we're focused on is rooted in education, it does come into play in all the different areas. So with the UNCRC at the moment, it's quite an exciting time in Scotland. Incorporation of the UNCRC and the rights of the child into Scots law is underway. So the bill was passed in Scottish Government earlier this year, but has been challenged by the UK government and is currently at the Supreme Court and being taken into consideration. And the hearing took place in July and the judgment has not yet been released. So it's a little bit up in the air, but in terms of My Rights, My Say, the legislation that supports the work that we do is already in Scots law. So in Scotland, all children have their rights to have their views considered when decisions are being made about the support that they get from their learning. And children who are aged 12 to 15, when they have additional support needs, they have more rights to ensure that they are involved. So I'll go into those in a moment, just in a little bit more detail, but I wanted just to pause to reflect on that third point on the slide there, which is children's rights versus parents' rights. Now, I'm not sure that versus is the best terminology to use, because ultimately, when children are exercising their rights, when children are using children's rights, the parents' rights are not removed. They're not replaced by children's rights. It's the expectation that the rights of the child can work alongside the rights of the parents. And it's the My Rights, My Say service is an opportunity for children aged 12 to 15 to exercise their rights if they want to individually. It doesn't mean they have to, and it doesn't mean that parents don't have the rights to be involved in supporting their children. It's quite important just to realise that the two are not in competition with each other. One thing that is worth mentioning, though, is that within the My Rights, My Say service, it's not expected that parents and carers or families and children try to use the same particular rights at the same time. So that's worth mentioning. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So all children have the right to have their views listened to and to be involved in decisions about support. The slide that's showing at the moment are the things, very technical term there, the things that are included if a child is aged 12 to 15 and they have additional support needs. So I won't run through all of them. You can find us on our My Rights, My Say website, but it gives you a general idea of the additional things that children aged 12 to 15 do have the right to ask for. So, for example, the right to support, to have their views heard, to have a supporter and advocate with them to get their views across, which would lead me very nicely back to SJ, who will talk in a bit more detail about the advocacy service, the advocacy part of our service and how that helps the children we work with and what they do. Over to you, SJ.
Perfect, thanks, Lucy. Can we have the next slide, please? That's great. So this details how an advocacy worker would help your child. Again, similar to Lucy, I'm not really going to go through the sort of ins and outs of the individual things that an advocacy worker would do, but what I can do is talk a little bit about what we will and won't do and what advocacy is. So My Rights, My Say advocacy is there to support the young person who wishes to exercise their own rights. So what we'll do is we'll build up a trusting, professional and confidential relationship with our advocacy partners, and we work with them in a way that works for them. We support them to know their rights and to have all the information that they need to make an informed decision about their education. We support them to share their views with their school and their education authority, and we can help young people to put in their requests for coordinated support plans or to have an assessment of their additional support needs carried out, and then the support that they would then need coming from that. While we do this to support young people, as Lucy quite rightly said, the rights of parents still exist in their own right. And the feedback that we've had is that some parents found it really helpful to have an advocacy worker involved, as it then separates their views from their views of their child, as sometimes those views can differ around the support that a young person would perhaps need. So you can see on the list that's a sort of procedure of what we can do through My Rights, My Say, support them to feel confident speaking up at meetings, empower the young person, and support them to request assessments, coordinated support plans, and explain options for them. The second one from the bottom is particularly important, that we do help young people to understand perhaps why decisions have been made if they're different to ones that they wanted. There could be a particular support that a young person needs that an education authority isn't able to provide, and that's where we would work with them to find a suitable solution for that with the education authority and the school, and if that wasn't possible, to then take it to either a tribunal or to independent adjudication, which is rights the young people have as well. We as advocacy workers within My Rights, My Say won't ever tell a young person what to do or give them advice on what's best for them. We need the young people who use My Rights, My Say to want to exercise their rights because it's their rights. And if they're exercising their rights and doing that, it's because they're doing that freely and because they want to. So we take referrals from anyone for the young person. So it can come from parents, it can come, through Inquire, it can come from absolutely anyone. But as it's the young person using their own rights, we have to make sure that they want to exercise those rights and want to be engaged. As I said before about we keep a confidential relationship so that we won't tell the school or someone's parents or carers something they've said unless the young person's asked us to. However, child protection applies, and we do talk to the young people at the start of the partnership about that if we feel there's something that needs to be passed on that is important, then we're honest with our young people about that, and we let them know that we don't keep that confidential, but that's all explained at the start of the relation building process. Excuse me. Lucy mentioned before, there are some differences between young people's rights and parental rights, and as I said before, the rights that a young person has, their parent also has the rights, and they, as Lucy said, go sort of hand in hand, although they can't exercise the same right at the same time. But there are notable exceptions to the rights that were extended to young people, as young people can't request their own placing request or right to mediation. They have other dispute resolutions, and as Lucy's went over, these rights aren't available to young people who don't have an additional support need. However, an additional support need, as you've seen, is very different to a disability though, and if a young person is having an issue at school, then we would say to talk to us, as all those other issues are classed as additional support needs. And we often say if there is an issue going on at school for a young person, then there quite often is a need there and they can use our service. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thanks very much for that summary. I think it was really helpful to see it. It's quite a lot of information to take on board when we're talking about this. There's a number of different services involved, obviously. So it's quite good just to have that written down, and obviously people can refer back to that if they want more information. I suppose one of the things I was going to say is working for Inquire is just how closely we all work together. So as much as we are all individual services coming together as My Rights, My Say, we're very much a team. We work very closely together to make sure that parents and carers that are getting in touch with us to find out more, or children who are looking for the help get to the right place, so they don't have to go through a number of different options. So we've obviously got processes in place to make sure that happens, and we're doing a lot of work to try and raise awareness of these rights with children and young people, and really see parents as having a very important part in making sure that their children understand and know their rights to support in school. So at the moment, I'm not seeing a massive number of questions coming in, but whenever I'm out and about talking to families or to professionals, what I find really helpful is just actually hearing about or telling people about some of the actual cases that we've had, because I think that's what really brings alive the impact that the service can have for children and young people. So Sarah Jane, I just wondered if you could talk a wee bit about sort of some of the issues that you're dealing with and helping children and young people with, but also just what does it look and feel like for a child using the service? That'd be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment we have round about 80 live My Rights, My Say cases, and to be honest, they're all totally individual. The help and support that the young person needs is all entirely based on their additional support needs and their coping strategies and the things that the school can put in place and the Education Authority can put in place to be able to support them. So for example, we've just came through a pandemic, are still going through it, but what we really found over the piece of working from home and working virtually was actually for some of our young people that worked really well. And we have a really high percentage. The last time I checked the figures, 60% of the young people that were referred to the advocacy part of My Rights, My Say had a diagnosis of being on the autistic spectrum. So 60% of the young people who use our service had a diagnosis or were going towards a diagnosis of autism. And we have found a large number of those young people much prefer engaging virtually and through Teams, Zoom, video chat, because it means that someone isn't coming into their own space. But we work very much holistically with children and young people on what it is they need and tailor our service around there. Although we can help with the rights, it's very much a process for that individual, and we support that. So for example, there are some young people even before COVID who have had, perhaps I'm thinking of one individual who had a diagnosis of PDA, which meant meeting new people was really hard for them. And although they wanted an advocacy worker and they really wanted to exercise their rights, there was that barrier of then it being something they were expected to do, and then it being really difficult for them to engage. So, we just took that really slowly, and we set up phone calls with the parent there initially, and then it went on speakerphone, and we just really took our time. And then eventually the young person felt able to share their email with us, and then the advocacy worker and the young person emailed back and forth. And something else that we've found and have been reported back from the other colleagues I work with on My Rights, My Say is sometimes working virtually and emailing back and forth, it gives a lot of time for the young person to sort of really get into the nuances of their views. So for example, we had a young person who was being supported by a learning assistant in school. And they were supposed to have full one-to-one support at all times. And then once we really get into the sort of nuances of the views, it turned out that although they did have one-to-one support, this learning assistant was also a first aider, and they were also on call for other things. And when we actually sat and broke it down, it turned out that there was very limited amount of time that young person actually was getting the one-to-one support in classes. So it's been really good from that perspective to break things down and to be able to work with young people. But yeah, My Rights, My Say, there's loads of things going on for young people in school. There can be a lot on the young person's mental health. There can be non-attenders who want to go back to school. There can be young people who want work sent home. There can be loads of different support options. One of our more successful cases was a young person who was able to devise their own sort of option of they didn't want to let their teacher and their whole class know that they were struggling and they needed regulation time. So they had a band that had green on one side and red on the other, and they would flip it so that, no one else knew. But if the teachers knew and seen that band going from red to green, they know, right, okay, they need to go to their safe space to be able to, regulate and be okay to rejoin class. So yeah, it's very individualistic, and we like to treat it that way while supporting young people. But I guess to sort of a long-winded way of answering your question, Kat, the feedback that we've had from young people is how much it doesn't just change their school life, but actually their confidence and their empowerment. I've got a quote from a young person that just blows me away, and it says that My Rights, My Say helped me because I hated getting into school. It made me so anxious and the work was too difficult. It went on for a long time and they wouldn't change. They weren't able to offer me a 5th year at school because of my learning difficulties and wouldn't put in the support. They didn't understand my difficulties, but My Rights, My Say did, and it helped me share my views, and that got me a new school, which will help me. And I'm so glad My Rights, My Say was involved, which is really, really good to hear. And we've had similar feedback. We seek feedback from young people and from parents, because parents are the people that are there from start to end and go through everything with a young person, and parental feedback has been really positive as well, in that it's empowered our young person, but also having an independent source come in and be involved with their child or young person and the situation actually picks up, and it's an extra tool to be able to get the right support and make people listen.
Yeah, it's so great to hear the feedback and the impact that it has on for children and young people. And I suppose it's not just, I suppose the input that you have will vary on how confident that child feels. So if it's somebody who doesn't feel able to go to meetings and would like you to go, you can do that, but providing that information. But if it's somebody who is happy doing that, it's just being there to support them. So it's lovely. It's such a great way to build up confidence as well. I suppose I was interested as well in that, as Lucy mentioned earlier on, there's obviously additional support needs is quite broad, so it includes children who have a specific condition such as autism or ADHD, I think Lucy mentioned earlier. But obviously there's children who may need support in school because of things like bullying or being a young carer. And I know that you've had some cases for things like that. And again, that would be really helpful just to sort of share how, because in a way, I don't know if that's the bit people realise that can be used for.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you on that one, Kat. I had a case myself where, if you looked at this young person, the young person themselves didn't see themselves as having any sort of additional support needs, but they'd worked with a project with us previously, and they were experiencing bullying within school, being targeted, and they didn't see that as an additional support need. But what we ended up doing was just talking about it, right, okay, what is this like for you? Can you tell your teachers? Can you tell the school? Okay, let's talk about that. And what ended up happening was they ended up engaging with My Rights, My Say around the bullying, around the things that was going on with school, sharing with me as their advocacy worker what things were like, me then being able to engage with their guidance teacher at the time. And the guidance teacher was phenomenal, had no idea that this was happening, but that comes from the young person not being able to share that with them and them needing that middle step, which is what My Rights, My Say is really good for, is being able to help them share those views. And we went into a meeting prepped with, this is what's happened, this is what the young person would like, and the school were really accommodating of, all right, okay, these are the people that are doing that, we will use our bullying policies and we will do X, Y and Z, but also to support you, let's move your classes, let's limit the interactions that you have. And they were really good, and it gives a sense of empowerment. I remember sitting in that meeting and the young person saying to me beforehand, I ain't speaking in there, so don't ask me to speak. You've got everything that I want written down, so you just do all the talking. And I went, yep, that's not a problem at all. And I think I got to the 3rd line of the things that we'd written down to talk about. And he's like, yeah, that's right, SJ, and we this, and this. And the young person took over the meeting, which is fantastic, because you always want to empower young people to tell their own stories, but we're there for that bit in the middle to help them share views. And
I suppose it's, sorry, I suppose, so I'm just going to say we've got about 15 minutes left, so if anyone who's watching wants to ask a question, please just pop that into the chat and we'll get that to Lucy or SG. There's not any at the moment, so I just wanted to pick up there on something that you said as well, because I suppose as well it's the fact that it can also be useful for children who are getting support but that don't. And I know that we've shared information on our website around I think it was a child with I think it was either dyslexia or I think it was dyslexia who was getting support, but the support maybe wasn't working for them in the way it was imagined. So again, it's not just about getting more support, it's actually saying this is, I've got support, but I actually would like something more discreet or different or more technology or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes back to the case I was referring to before. On paper, the support can look absolutely fantastic, but in reality, if it's not working for that young person, then it's not working. It's not support. It needs to be tailored to the young person and their own individual needs. And I think that's really important to hold, is that, you know, it might not be masses of big things. For example, we had a case where the young person was being severely bullied, and the answer was to give them a pass card that, you know, let them move between different areas, and that can take some time to build. But you're absolutely right, Kat, there can be loads of different supports in place, but unless it's the right support, it doesn't need to move heaven and earth or be, you know, learning assistance. For some young people that's absolutely needed, and for some young people it can be, you know, just a simple change in letting a teacher know what's going on, or introducing one of these bands where they need to go to you know, the sensory room, or to the base or something like that, and it will all be entirely individual on what that young person needs.
Person wants, yeah.
I think ultimately, I think that's the message we hear again and again through Inquire and through Reach, is that children, young people, they want to be involved in decisions about their support. They want to participate in it, because it is their education and it's their life, and they have got a lot to say about it. And I think with the work that My Rights My Say does, is that, like you said, SJ, it creates a bridge between that communication that maybe sometimes doesn't work as well as it could. But I think also the work that Partners Advocacy do, and I think also the work that Children in Scotland do with Billy there as well, is that there's such an emphasis on individualizing it. And I think that's why we are successful at what we can help children achieve, because it has to be individualized. You have to be listening and then acting on their wishes. So
yeah, I was just going to ask you to maybe speak a wee bit, Lucy, about Reach, because obviously it's great that the service is there, but if children and young people or families don't know about it, and it needs, you know, to just explain a little bit about how parents can use Reach with children to explain their rights.
Yeah, definitely. So Reach is curated for children, young people, or it's written by children and young people. But that doesn't mean that, you know, adults can't access it or use it. It's a great platform to start conversations with your child or with children that you work with about support that's on offer, or about My Rights My Say, or about the rights that they have if they're a child with additional support needs. We've also we make it as accessible as possible. So there's lots of tools. So if English is an additional language, you can change all to different languages. You can change the color schemes. We have a lot of visual content as well. So we really have created a platform where children with additional support needs can talk about their stories. And as SJ was saying, that's one of the best ways that we can learn as practitioners or professionals that work with children and young people, is to listen to them and their life experience and their stories. And then we're able to build upon that and help them get the support they are entitled to.
Great, thank you. So we've had a question in SJ. It's, do the advocates have training in gaining views from children with language difficulties who are unable to manage higher order questions?
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Kat. Yeah, so one of the things that we should mention about My Rights My Say is that for the young people in the advocacy part, for them to exercise their rights, there's two caveats. So the young person has to have capacity, which means they have to understand the rights that they're exercising, and that exercising these rights can't affect their well-being. So there has to be an understanding of that young person if what they're asking for is what's going to happen from that. So they have to have capacity to instruct. However, we absolutely do. We train our advocacy workers to a really high degree. We train them in talking mats. We train them in, you know, different communication tools. And again, you are going to think that I'm banging the drum on this, but it's really individualistic to each young person. So at point of referral within Partners in Advocacy, we ask a question on background interest of the young person, so that we get a sense of who they are, so that we can build our relationship with them on things that the young person finds important. Also, what we do for communication is we talk to the people around that young person. So if the referrals come in from a parent, it might be calling them and saying, do you know, is virtual something that works for the young person? Would it need to be face-to-face? How does that communication work? How do you communicate with that young person? And we would always endeavour to do our best to match our communication style to the young person. And we also have access to translator for different languages and things like that, but we would always do our absolute utmost to match our communication style to the young persons and to be instructed by them.
Thanks, Esty. I was also just going to ask a quick question as well about, I suppose, we've got, you've spoken there about, you know, the benefits of things being discussed and being put in place. And I suppose there's might be instances where it's agreed that something will be put in place, but then possibly it's not put in place following up with that, or there's changes or whatever that the child is unhappy. And I suppose it's a little bit about what happens in those situations, but also maybe just touching upon the other bits of My Rights, My Say, which have more sort of dispute resolution angle for them. So it's maybe worth just touching on that sort of as a point of when that happens. I'm not sure who the best person to, I mean, it's maybe worth, Lucy, if you want to, or SG, if you want to talk a little bit about what happens in those situations, but then Lucy, if you want to talk about children's views, and that would be great. Yeah,
I can start and pass it over, certainly. Yeah, so this is something that can happen within that support's agreed, but it's actually not then acted upon, or the way it's acted upon isn't quite right. I mean, I guess the good thing with My Rights, My Say, as Lucy mentioned, is that it doesn't just involve the school in alone, it involves the education authority. So when a young person exercises their views go through the education authority as well as the school. So that's one level up, that if the support isn't being provided, there's also sort of resolution methods of going through independent adjudication, or if the dispute is to do with a coordinated support plans, going through you know, the additional support needs tribunal. However, the key to getting the right support is communication, and is communication with the school and what they can provide, what they can support with, what they're able to do, what they're not, and if there's something that they should be providing that they're saying they're unable to, that's when, you know, taking it to that next higher level is more appropriate.
And just to pick up where SJ stopped there, that My Rights, My Say, again, the service is for partnerships. So we, as we mentioned before, there's partners in advocacy, there's Inquire, but then Children in Scotland and Care Legal sort of take it to maybe that next level. So our Children's Views service, which is part of Children in Scotland, they collect the views of children, young people, if they are submitting their views to tribunal, for example, or they work one-on-one with children who need their views collecting for whatever reason. Maybe somebody doesn't feel as comfortable to do that, and so we can sort of step in and help with that sort of area as well. So I think it just goes back round to what we talked about before, is that with My Rights, My Say, is that ultimately as a team, even though we work independently in different organisations, when we come together to work as My Rights, My Say, we are really keen to individualise and make it work for the child that we're working with, to ensure that they get the support they need. So it kind of goes all the way up to, as SJ said, independent adjudication or the tribunal kind of level as well.
And also just add to that, I suppose, the Children's Views, part of the service that helps local authorities and schools, if they want to actually enhance their practice with listening to children and using their views and gathering their views. There's a lot of resources online on the My Rights, My Say website to help schools think about how they do that, but obviously the service is there as well to support them in that work. So all that information is on the website. So lots of visits to the website, hopefully, after this. So we had that last question from Alison about the advocates training. So thanks very much for answering that. That was really, really helpful. We've got about sort of 3 or 4 minutes left. So I'm just going to ask, we've got Hannah in the background who will put up some questions for us just about feedback on whether this was helpful or not. But I suppose in a way I wanted to end again on the sort of impact on children and young people, because it's the bit, when I read the feedback from children, I'm always really impressed by just the impact it has. And I remember reading one a message from a young carer who had said that he didn't even know that there was anyone else in his school who was a young carer. Through the work that he's done with you, he tapped into lots of support that would help him in that. But I wondered, SJ, if you've got sort of feedback that's really sort of symbolises the what you do and the impact it has.
Do you know, I've got a cracking one actually, and it's one of our young people who was involved with My Rights, My Say, and their case ended. They sent me an email asking to donate money to the cause, and we said, you know, we're Scottish government funded, we wouldn't be able to accept that, but thank you so much. It goes to show how much, you know, My Rights, My Say is impacted. And actually that young person then raised money and made sensory kits and gave them to My Rights, My Say for young people who are going through a similar situation, to have these sensory kits, you know, fiddle toys, because it can be a really anxious process. But I think the lengths that young person had went to show their appreciation to My Rights, My Say as a service was just, you know, above and beyond. For that young person, they've said that it was life-changing and that they were in a really dark place, and that without My Rights, My Say help, they wouldn't have been able to find you know, a way through, and they weren't in school for a really long time, and they're now able to start transitioning to their new placement and to start getting back in education. And that young person's a real, you know, a real shining star and a real highlight on how good the service is to go out on their free time and raise money so that people that are going through the same, you know, things as them have support.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody. Actually, we're just coming to the end of our time. As I said, if anyone is watching and would like to have a further chat, Inquire helpline can provide information on the situation for you, but also refer you on, or you can go on the website and fill in the referral form. It sort of talks you through your situation and the best way to contact the service. On that note, I'd just like to thank you both for coming along. Thanks very much. And I'd also like to thank Sharon, who's been interpreting in the back at great speed. Thank you very much for keeping up with us. If anybody has any feedback that they'd like to give us in terms of any more information that would be helpful, then please do just pop that in the comments. Now we'll pick those up. On that note, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll just close here.